So in the previous lecture we talked about government failure in the form of applying a price floor or a legal minimum price to a particular good or service and how that creates a deadweight loss. Now the price ceiling is the exact opposite. So a price ceiling is where we have a legal maximum price of a good or service. And so what the government aims to do here is to allow everyone to lead a reasonable standard of living. And this usually is applied to combat the problem of market power. And so in some cases where a certain firm has market power over a good, which may be a necessity, the government helps overcome market power or overcomes the possibility of the firm charging a very high price for a good or service by implementing a legal maximum price for which this good or service could be sold in the market. And this could be in the form of the example of, say, rental accommodation. And as we know that most people require somewhere to stay, and because at the moment in Australia there is very high competition for rent or housing, the government tries to allow everyone in the economy to find rent or to find shelter or accommodation by applying this price ceiling so that most people could afford to pay rent at a certain price. So by using the same demand supply analysis that we've gone through throughout this course, we can see that the quantity axis, which is the x-axis in terms now, is represented by the quantity of rental accommodation, and the price axis, which we usually use P to denote in other macroeconomic lectures, will now be the price of rent. Now, assuming simplicity, we're going to say the rental accommodation in the microeconomic sense has an upward sloping supply curve, but in reality we can see that there has to be an upward limit of rent, which is very, very inelastic to an extent because they have market power. So but for this purposes of this example, we're going to assume that rent has an upward sloping and relatively unit elastic supply curve. And at the same time we can see the demand for rent is downward sloping. So prior to any government intervention, we can see that the average price of rent, let's just call this, instead of calling it P1, we're going to call this, say, $100 a night. So rent costs $100 a night, and 1,000 people in this economy are able to buy this rent at $1,000 a night. But the government here says, okay, there are 2,000 people in this economy, and now 1,000 people are homeless. So what they do is they apply a price ceiling. But before we go on to this price ceiling, we're going to see, what if the price ceiling is, say, at $200? Will this actually affect the market here? Well, it probably wouldn't, because the equilibrium price is at $100. And so because the equilibrium price is at $100, everything in this market is being cleared at the $100. So that supply is 1,000 units and demand is also 1,000 units. And so those people buying are happy and those people selling are happy. So now we can see that if the price ceiling is above the equilibrium price, that would have no effect on the market or any welfare outcomes of this market. But now let's look at the condition where the price ceiling is below the market outcome. So say it's at $50. And what this means is that at $50, the demand for rental accommodation is at 2,000. And so 2,000 people in the economy, everybody can afford to pay rent at $50 per night. So everybody would have technically a home or a place to stay at night. But what this means is that because suppliers or producers are profit maximizing, and because we're assuming that resources are easily mobile, so they could be utilized at their most effective use very easily, there would actually be a contraction in supply. And so let's say only 800 units are being supplied. And so what this means is that because producers see that because there is a price ceiling or a maximum price that they can sell, some producers who produce at $100 per unit of housing, who were willing to supply at $100, now are unwilling to supply because, say, they're now making a loss. So initially, if they're supplying at $80, this would mean if they're selling for $50, they're making a loss of $30. So they're not going to be willing to supply at this price, and they're going to reallocate their resources to something more effective. And when this occurs, there will be a contraction in supply. And so what happens is that the supply now would be equal to 80. So at 800 units, we can see that buyers are willing to pay at this price here. So let's just call this P1. So 800 units, buyers are willing to pay P1. So these buyers here who derive a satisfaction of greater than P1 would be willing to purchase rent if there were only 800 units of rent available. And so let's analyze this using the welfare analysis that we've been so accustomed to from previous lectures. We have A, B, C, D, E, and F. We can see that without a price ceiling and with the market at equilibrium, we can see that the consumer surplus, being the excess of the price being paid that the consumers are willing to supply at, would actually increase, or would actually be A plus B plus C, and that's the consumer surplus right there. Producer surplus, on the other hand, would be those who are willing to supply or could supply at a cost less than $100, so they're making a profit, which would be D plus E plus F, and therefore the total surplus in this economy, or in this marketplace, would be A plus B plus C plus D plus E and plus F. And now let's see what would happen if there is a price ceiling being involved in this market. If there's a price ceiling at only $50, only 800 will be supplied, and only those 800 people who are willing to purchase the price at $50, only 800 people get into this market, and so the consumer surplus would be A plus B plus D, and those who derive satisfaction in excess of the price paid for rental accommodation. So the producers, or the consumer surplus, would in this case be A plus B plus D. So anything excess of $50 that you're willing to purchase it at, and so the change will be D minus C. And consumers gain if and only if D is larger than C. So this area here is larger than this area there. On the other hand, producer surplus would actually decrease because there would only be 800 units supplied, and those who only supply if they could supply at a cost less than $50 right here. So producer surplus would only be F, and the change here would be negative D minus E. And as we can see, the total surplus with the price floor, or the price ceiling, rather, will be A plus B plus D plus F. And so the change, or the deadweight loss, exhibited here would be D minus C, which cancels out, and negative C minus E. And so that will represent the deadweight loss. So as we can see now, even though the government is trying to solve this idea, or combat this idea of market power, in the sense that the firms can charge outrageous prices for rental accommodation, and that 1,000 people are left homeless, because they've put a price ceiling on. In fact, now we've seen a shortage of rental accommodation, and instead of only 1,000 people being stuck homeless, we're going to see a rise to 1,200 people being left without rent. And so this is represented by the deadweight loss of negative C minus E, or the loss of economic efficiency, or the loss of economic benefit by applying the price ceiling. So even though we can assume that the government is trying to do good, or they're trying to do the best for the best of the total economy, and they are improving the consumer surplus if and only if that D is greater than C, they've actually lost a lot of surplus in the sense that producers are losing benefit. And from that we can see that the total surplus, or the economy, is actually worse off by the government applying a price ceiling or implementing a legal maximum price of a good or service in this market. So in this case, they're going to apply a legal maximum price, which is below the equilibrium price of $100 on rental accommodation. So as we can see, the government has failed in this instance in correcting market failure, and that, in fact, ironically, they've actually caused an inefficient allocation of resources, and they have not maximized the living standards of the entire economy, as exhibited by a decrease in total surplus.